Okay, hello out there, listeners. You are dialed in to Expert Expertise for another episode of our wonderful podcast, where each week we are lucky to be joined by a different expert in a field that you all, our listeners, are interested in. This is Frank Edwards, of course, your intrepid host. And this week, we're very fortunate to be joined by somebody that we've had a lot of interest in from the email, from the Twitter. A parenting expert, and he goes by the name Sid Pierce, and he is a world-renowned expert in the field of parenting. Mr. Pierce, thank you so much for joining. Just to ask, am I pronouncing that name correctly?
It's actually pronounced Pierce, like piercing or Pierce Brosnan.
Excellent. Okay, go ahead and make note on that. So, first of all, again, thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy day and a very busy week.
Oh, well, I'm happy to clear my schedule, make a couple of hours to give back to the community and, really see how many people I can help.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. And on that note, I want to ask you, what is parenting?
It's a great question, Frank. Parenting is sort of like a lifestyle, I would say. Not like the exciting ones that you read about on magazines, but it is something you do when you wake up, when you're eating, sleeping, anything. When you're at work, everything. You are a parent. Yeah.
Yeah, and would you say, do you have any tips for the parents out there?
If you're a parent, then your attention is sort of like the salt in a fine recipe. Less is more. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like the old adage, in a fine recipe, when it comes to salt, less is more.
Absolutely. Yes.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great analogy.
You just want to sprinkle it on there.
Yeah. And on that note of sprinkling, I imagine we have a lot of parents that mistakenly think that they need to pay attention to their children. What do you see when these parents give that attention to kids? How do you see that manifested in their behavior?
Well, I think that this is a very common mistake. You reinforce bad habits when you give children too much attention. Like, for instance, if there's a child that's crying, you don't want to pay attention to it because it's going to think that the crying is going to garner its parents' love. And it'll cry more. But also at the same time, if you have a child that's rambunctious and making way too much noise because they're happy, you also don't really want to pay attention to it. Because when you do that, the child will just continue to be completely terrible.
Interesting. And do you feel like there are a lot of terrible children out there, Sydney?
I don't think that there are terrible children, only terrible, terrible, terrible parents. But that's why I'm here, to solve a problem.
Yeah, and I think we'd love to hear some more stories about that. Tell us how else you help out parents just out in the wild, other ways that you do that.
Well, there's one thing that you can do if you have a child that's making too much noise, maybe it starts crying. Instead of giving it attention, what you can do is notice that child's cries are a little bit rhythmic. So if you have like a pair of bongos lying around or a rain stick or any type of percussion instrument, you can sort of go in there and jam along. And that's the best way to create a bond with your child.
Interesting. And I don't imagine you feel comfortable intervening, but let's say you did see a child crying in the grocery store next to the Kit Kats, the InStyle magazines. I don't imagine you'd feel comfortable, but what would you do in that situation?
Well, Frank, let me tell you, this happens to me probably 4 to 5 times a week. And when I hear that child crying, obviously I can't bring bongos everywhere that I go. They're a little bit spacious, but I do carry a harmonica, and it works perfectly to harmonize with the crying.
Got it. And in these, what sound to be very frequent grocery store trips, 4 to 5 times a week, when you pull out that harmonica and you're blasting that alongside one or maybe more crying children, would you say the parents warmly receive that?
Oh, absolutely. Every single time, as soon as I'm done, the parent comes up to me and they're like, where did you get that harmonica? I need like 10 of them. And I always recommend they get at least 3 different keys. even though children are mostly tone deaf.
Interesting. A lot of insights that I'm taking away here. And would you say that this is something that brings you a lot of joy? You know, I would say it sounds like you sleep really well at night with all the good you're putting out in the world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It does bring me a lot of joy. And I mean, I know that this is a little bit off topic, but I have been having a little bit of trouble sleeping lately. I've been having some pretty terrible nightmares, but I'm 100% sure that the two are unrelated.
Yeah, and I think our viewers and our listeners would love to hear about those nightmares if you don't mind walking us through those.
Sure. Well, so I mean, it's really not that terrifying. It's like I'm in a boat, right? And I'm rowing on the ocean. And then I look down at the water, and instead of water, it's blood. And instead of oars, the oars are my hands. I'm trying to push myself. I don't see anything around me except for the storm above my head. It's raining, but it's not raining water, it's raining blood. And that's why I'm drifting through it. But then the clouds, they open up a little bit, and a little hand comes down. It touches the back of my neck, and it says everything's going to be okay. It just needs to take my hands. But my hands are the oars. I need my hands. So that's pretty much the gist of it.
So tell me, Sid, how'd you get your start in parenting?
Well, you know, it's a great question. When I was younger, I lived in this very small town, this podunk, middle of nowhere. And I've always been kind of fascinated by a lot of stuff. But when I graduated high school, I decided, okay, time to go explore these interests in college, which didn't work out. I decided college is not really for me. But I did have a great interest in my science class during the sex ed, because I saw the sperm eat the egg, and I just had to know what happened next. I needed to, you know.
Yeah, and for maybe some of the readers out there that and listeners that may not be quite as familiar, or perhaps even the host of this own podcast, what is sperm?
That's a great question, Frank. I'm so glad you asked me. Sperm lives in men.
Oh, and then where specifically?
Well, you know, in a way, we're all sperm, because once the sperm eats the egg, it turns into a baby, which grows into a boy and then a man. And that's all of us. But if I had to guess, I would say the balls. And you can actually check right now.
I will make a note to do that. And if you could send just one message out there to all the young parents that we may have listening in, what would that message be?
Drinking was the mistake.
All right. Is there anything you want to add on that, or would that be the message?
You know, I think that'll be it, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my book.
Okay.
The Pierce Method. It's apparent. Just like me. Well, not like me. I don't have any kids, but It's Apparent is the name of the book.
Oh, interesting. So we actually just got a reader email that just popped through, and they wanted to know a little bit more about that nugget you just added in there about not having any actual children of your own. If you could just walk us through that a bit.
Sure. Well, the way that I see it, all children are my children, whether or not I actually created them. Because, you know, it's like they say, it takes a village to raise a child. But I think it takes an expert to raise as many children as possible. And I'm hoping to pass on my knowledge to you guys so that you're all experts and every child becomes your child as well.
Yeah, and earlier I heard you say whether or not I'm the father of those children, which is leading me to think maybe you're passing a little bit more out into the world than just your knowledge. Is it possible that there's some kids out there that are being raised by a village and not by their biological father?
Oh, well, you know, this is actually a story as old as time, and only time will tell.
Excellent. And I think that's great advice for what I assume to be many children out there that may share your DNA. And for those children out there, just any listeners, where can they pick up a copy of that book?
They can find a copy of that book on my website, sidpierce.com. And also, if those children are listening, just know that as children, you're also my children.
That's excellent. And I just have to say, Sydney, you've been an excellent guest. We've learned a lot. We've got a lot of takeaways from this. And I just have to say, you've been an excellent guest with us so far on the Double E podcast. And I just wanted to thank you for your time. And listeners out there, we're going to take a quick break before we bring on our next guest. He is the world's first jazz pharmacist, and he's going to be playing a little tune for us. And we will talk to him after a couple of breaks from our sponsors.